In this lesson, we look at T-6 tactical formation. Tactical is the primary formation flown when employing fighter aircraft. It is designed to optimize weapons and radar employment while improving visual lookout and increasing maneuverability. For two-ship formations, tactical formations include line abreast and wedge. If lead directs 2 to go tactical, this is understood to mean move to line abreast. Lead is responsible for maneuvering the formation and monitoring the wingman, especially during tactical turns that momentarily cause the wingman to lose visual of lead. The wingman is primarily responsible for maintaining formation position and deconfliction. The wingman's primary reference for heading and airspeed is the lead aircraft. There are several desired learning objectives for T-6 tactical formation sorties. Based on feedback from Phase 3 and FTUs, the main skill students should take away from the handful of TAC rides they get in the T-6 is station keeping. The ability to be in position and maintain line abreast is a basic yet essential skill as students go into the T-38, IFF, B course, and operational fighter squadrons. Additionally, pilots learning TAC form must develop a dynamic cross-check and disciplined wingmanship, which means as wing, they should be able to see a visual signal from lead, understand it, and take decisive action based on it. Building on this concept, T-6 pilots must have a basic understanding of TAC form position, turns, and angle recognition. To help meet this objective, in this video we look at basic T-6 TAC form maneuvering, aspect angle, and heading crossing angle. Phase 3 and fighter track courses will teach the more advanced concepts of tactical formation. In addition to these mission objectives, there are several training objectives for individual sorties. As with basic formation, the primary objective of wing is deconfliction. Wing must attain stack to ensure 100% altitude deconfliction in all turns. The next objective is to be in position or expeditiously correcting toward it. As lead, your tactical objectives are to fly a contract platform, which translates to maintaining 5 knots of desired airspeed, 5 degrees of desired heading, and within 100 feet of desired altitude. Additionally, you must execute 100% correct and timely visual signals for TAC turns. If these two objectives are not met by the lead aircraft, the wingman will not get effective training out of the sortie. The parameters of T-6 tactical line abreast are defined as 2,000 to 3,000 feet lateral separation, line abreast to 10 degrees aft, with a vertical stack of up to 500 feet. Optimum vertical stack for 2 is 200 to 300 feet above lead. Normally, T-6 tactical formation is flown at 200 knots. Turns are done using approximately 70 degrees of bank, max power, and 2 to 3 Gs to maintain 200 knots. The wingman assumes turns are 90 degrees of heading change unless lead signals otherwise. The primary reference for line abreast in any airframe is for the wingman to put lead directly abeam their shoulder. In the front cockpit of the T-6, put lead's tail in line with your wing leading edge. In the rear cockpit, put lead in line with your static wicks. At 2,000 feet lateral separation, the ejection seats and both pilots' helmets are visible. At 2,500 feet, the ejection seats are still discernible, but individual pilots cannot be distinguished. At 3,000 feet, the canopy begins to blend in with the fuselage, but the prop blade is still visible. As lead, you can help your wingman greatly by holding a specific altitude at all times. If and when you inadvertently climb or descend, leading a turn, correct back to your starting altitude. By shacking your altitude, airspeed, and heading, your wingmen can cross-check their flight instruments to assist with station keeping. A soda can height above or below the horizon will provide the optimal 200 to 300 foot of stack. Double this reference for 500 feet. When co-altitude, lead will appear slightly above the horizon, or approximately 1 to 2 fingers width. Being co-altitude is not desired unless maintaining standard formation with ATC. In basic formation, you are taught to correct stack, line, spacing in that order. In TAC formation, being line abreast is the first priority when straight and level. The correction priority in TAC form is line, spacing, stack. To fix line when forward or aft of a beam, climb or descend to trade altitude for airspeed. To fix spacing, use heading crossing angle, keeping in mind this will change your line abreast visual reference. Once line and spacing are good, stack 200 to 300 feet above lead if able. We'll now get into specific TAC formation maneuvers done in the T-6. This lesson incorporates two-dimensional animations to demonstrate the maneuvers. The blue aircraft is lead, and the wingman is red. Since these are two-dimensional videos, just pretend the red aircraft is 200 to 300 feet above the blue aircraft at all times. Radio transmissions are included from the 11248 and the Advanced T-6 Operating Procedures and Standards document, January 2020 edition. The formation call sign is wire. Radio calls from the lead aircraft will be in blue text, and any comms required by 2 are in red. As with basic formation, radio communications will be kept to a minimum and visual signals are used to the max extent possible. The aircraft in these videos are always traveling the same speed and distance. They also have the same turn radius, meaning both aircraft are using the same amount of G and bank angle. To send 2 to tactical line abreast, push 2 to route if they're in fingertip, then porpoise your aircraft. You could also direct this over the radio by saying, wire, go tactical. If desired, you can include the side and reference heading. As 2, begin a climb to 200 to 300 feet above lead and get 2,000 to 3,000 foot spacing by turning away from lead about 10 to 20 degrees. Then return to reference heading once spacing is good. You'll need to add a small amount of power while climbing and holding this 10 to 20 degree heading crossing angle, since you are traveling a further distance than lead. The first thing we'll discuss is check turns. Check turns are used for small heading corrections, usually no more than 30 degrees, and to realign the formation. A check turn can be done with or without radio comms. Without comms, lead turns to the desired heading, 2 matches, and then fixes position once on the new heading. For small heading and course corrections that do not require an aggressive contract turn, lead will maintain current airspeed and power setting to make the turn. When directed on the radio, both aircraft turn simultaneously to the new heading using a contract turn. As lead, consider using reference headings. 2 does not acknowledge on the radio because 2 is the first to turn, which lets lead know 2 copied and is executing the command. In this video clip, 2 is at lead's 12 left aspect. To put 2 line abreast quickly, lead will direct a check turn 30 degrees to the right. Now that we're in the tactical line abreast position, let's start with some basic concepts. First, we'll cover the 2 heading crossing angle exercises. In heading angle exercise part 1, 2 will see that with a diverging heading away from lead, the lead aircraft will appear aft of line abreast. Additionally, the lead aircraft will gradually appear to get smaller since 2 is slowly moving away. Because 2 is traveling a further distance than lead, 2 will drift aft of lead's 3-9 line. To begin this exercise, lead will say, wire, standby heading crossing angle exercise part 1. 2 will acknowledge by saying 2. As 2, begin with 2,000 foot spacing, line abreast on the 9 aspect. Lead will then say, wire, begin heading crossing angle exercise, reference heading 090. 2 will acknowledge and turn away from lead somewhere between 5 and 15 degrees, as desired. At about 3,000 foot spacing, 2 will match lead's heading, then descend to gain airspeed in order to get back to lead's 9 aspect. In heading angle exercise part 2, we will see what a line error is. In this exercise, both aircraft will check to the same heading, which will be 10 degrees towards 2. This exercise begins with 3,000 foot spacing on lead's 9 aspect. Now 2 is in front of lead with no heading crossing angle. This can be held until learning objectives are met. 2 should then climb to decrease airspeed and or turn approximately 10 degrees towards lead in order to move back to lead's 9 aspect. Now let's talk about the angle exercise. This exercise is done to show angle off nose and aspect angle positioning. It also somewhat shows 2 the fighting wing and wedge aspect angles. Wedge will be covered later in this video. The angle exercise, part 1, is a series of 3 check turns. The first turn is 45 degrees from the starting heading. The second turn is an additional 15 degrees in that same heading. The third check turn is opposite direction, 60 degrees, to the original heading. Each heading is held for 10 seconds or so to give 2 a chance to see the angle off heading, and cockpit references for 4.5 aspect and 3 aspect in reference to the lead aircraft. Here's a video of what the angle exercise looks like. The comms are essentially the same as the heading exercises. There's a part 2 angle exercise to show 0 aspect utilizing in-place 90-degree turns. The in-place 90-degree turn will be covered later in this video. If the instructor pilots wish to do angle exercise part 2, it is done nearly identical to angle exercise part 1 in terms of communications and desired learning objectives. During a hook turn, the formation turns 180 degrees with both aircraft performing a contract turn at the same time in the same direction. A hook turn into the wingman must be directed over the radio and does not require a verbal acknowledgement. 2 will then initiate a contract turn away from lead. During the first half of the turn, lead is visual and should match the wingman's fuselage through 90 degrees of turn. Approximately halfway through the turn, lead will lose sight of the wingman and 2 will begin looking at the top of the canopy for lead while continuing the contract turn. On the second half of the turn, lead will lose visual of 2 and will continue a contract turn to the desired rollout heading. Once visual is attained by 2, the wingman will vary airspeed and G to roll out in line abreast position after approximately 180 degrees of turn. Here's a hook turn into 2. Hook turns away from the wingman may be signaled visually by a wing flash or directed over the radio. If initiated with a wing flash, lead will begin turning when the wingman begins the turn. When a hook turn is done without comms, lead's immediate turn indicates to 2 that it is a hook turn. For the first half of the turn, the wingman should match lead and align fuselages through 90 degrees of turn, then transition to a contract turn. Shortly after halfway through the turn, lead should reacquire sight of the wingman. Here's a hook turn away from 2. Now that you know what a hook turn is, let's talk about the tactical G-awareness exercise. TAC form, especially flown in Phase 3 and beyond, involves high G turning during fluid maneuvering, BFM, etc. These maneuvers are not covered in this video since they are not currently flown in Phase 2 at Vance, Columbus, Laughlin, or Pensacola. In T-6 tactical maneuvering, 4 Gs is about the most you'll be doing unless a set of ET3 is done during your profile. That said, to prepare students going into Phase 3 in the T-38, the tactical G awareness exercise will be practiced. The TAC form GX uses the same anti-G strain technique as learned in single ship and basic form GXs. The biggest difference with the tactical GX is now 2 hook turns are done under increased G. The first hook turn is a 4G warm-up and the second is a 5G awareness turn. The hook turn direction is not specified in the 11248 or standards, so it can be done towards or away from 2, as desired by lead. The priority before starting the GX is to have 3,000 foot lateral spacing and ideally 220 knots of airspeed. Maintaining perfect line abreast position for 2 is not a priority once the GX has begun. After the GX is complete and 2 is back to line abreast, a typical T-6 tack profile has the formation practicing a series of delayed 90-degree turns. These turns may not always be exactly 90 degrees of heading change. For turns greater than approximately 60 degrees, lead will generally direct a delayed 90-degree turn. On a side note, in Phase 2, only heading changes of 90 and 45 are practiced. If the heading change is 30 degrees or less, use a check turn. Additionally, when practicing 45 and 90 degree turns in Phase 2, it is best to use either section lines or cardinal headings, such as 360, 045, 090, etc., so that the HSI heading can be cross-checked during turns and straight and level flight. We'll start by talking about 90-degree turns into 2. With this turn, lead starts a contract turn towards 2. 2 continues straight ahead and will initiate a 90-degree contract turn when lead's aircraft is approaching approximately nose on. After the turn to the desired heading is complete, 2 is responsible for adjusting line, spacing, and stack as required to be in the proper line abreast position. Here are 2 videos of a delayed 90-degree turn into 2. This video is real time, the next is in slow motion. For a delayed 90-degree turn away from 2, lead will visually signal 2 with a large wing flash in the direction of the turn. 2 will then begin a contract turn towards lead and will roll out after approximately 90 degrees of turn. The lead aircraft initiates their 90-degree turn once 2 is approaching approximately nose on. As always, after the turn to the desired heading is complete, 2 is responsible for being in position and must make necessary adjustments as required. 2 should start maneuvering to the correct position as soon as it becomes apparent that a deviation has or will occur. Here are 2 videos of a delayed 90-degree turn away from 2. Of course, as humans and pilots in training, 2 is not always in position before lead begins a turn. If MOA and weather permits, as lead you should not begin a turn until 2 is line abreast with proper stack. As 2, if you are out of position, expeditiously get in position. If unable to delay your turn as lead, a hook turn is a great option to turn around and give 2 time to get into position. As lead, if you must execute a 90-degree turn before 2 is line abreast, just send it. If this happens to you as 2, it is generally best to start your turn early if tight or aft of lead, and turn later than normal if you are wide or forward of lead. If tight or behind, start the turn just before lead's nose is pointing at you. If wide or forward, wait for lead's nose to point aft of your tail before starting your turn. Keep in mind, after rolling out on your desired heading, you will then need to correct your spacing. Here are 4 slow motion videos of aircraft that are out of position. A white ghost plane represents where 2 should be, and the red plane is where 2 actually is. If you do not initiate your turn early or late when out of position, and simply start your turn when lead's nose is pointing at you, you will end up either forward or aft of lead's 9 aspect. This video is of the turn exercise. Again, the white ghost plane is in position. One red plane is wide and the other is tight. If you use pure pursuit turn timing when out of position, you will end up being forward of lead's 3-9 line if you started wide, and aft if you started tight. As already mentioned, the check turn is for heading changes up to 30 degrees, and the delayed 90 turn works well for heading changes of 60 to 90 degrees. In between 30 and 60 degrees of heading change, the delayed 45 turn is used. Again, in phase 2, the delayed 45 turn will be done to as close to 45 degrees of heading change as possible. We'll start with the 45 degree turn into 2. Like with the 90, if lead wants to turn 45 degrees in the direction of 2, lead simply does a contract turn to that heading. As lead rolls out, 2 can either continue on their heading until lead passes through 6 o'clock and is visible on the other side of the canopy, or 2 can execute a 20 to 30 degree turn towards lead to generate aft line of sight prior to initiating the turn and rolling out on lead's heading. Here are 2 video clips of delayed 45 degree turns into 2 without the check turn. Now, a video of the check turn method. If using the 20 to 30 degree check turn into lead as described in the 11-248, be aware that this method does slightly increase the distance you have to travel compared to lead. In fact, using this image from the 248, 2 has to travel 3% farther than lead. If both aircraft are shacking their airspeed, contract turn, and the turn timing, 2 will end up slightly aft of lead if the spacing on the new heading is correct. To prevent being aft, you could always tighten your turn after making that 20 to 30 degree check turn into lead. This will cause you to be tight when rolling out line abreast, however. To lead a 45 degree turn away from 2, signal the turn with a large wing flash in the direction of the turn. When the wingman's nose is approaching the desired rollout heading, signal 2 to roll out by initiating a wing flash into the wingman. Lead then begins the turn when 2 is approaching lead's 4.5 aspect. Here are 2 videos of the delayed 45 degree turn away from 2. Now we'll talk about shackles. A shackle is a great way to help 2 get back to line abreast quickly. Additionally, the shackle in tack form is the equivalent of a cross-under in basic form. Earlier we talked about the options available to 2 to get to line abreast. 2 can use vertical and torque to change airspeed. Lead can also direct a check turn to place 2 in position. Sometimes a check turn is not an option though, like when lead is en route on a specific heading or flying in a specific direction. This is the case when proceeding to and from the MOA, for example. Lead initiates the turn by transmitting wire, shackle. 2 does not verbally acknowledge this call. If 2 is line abreast and the shackle is being used as a cross-under, both aircraft simultaneously turn approximately 45 degrees into one another. The wingman rolls out as required to zero out line of sight and cross directly over or under lead. Both aircraft reverse the turn after crossing flight paths. Lead and wing may maneuver as required and may not turn at all if the shackle is being utilized to fix excessive out of position. It is the wingman's responsibility to deconflict altitude and maneuver to line abreast on the opposite side. Here, the shackle is being performed using 45 degrees of heading change towards each other. For spacing, the aircraft continue on this heading a couple seconds before turning back to the reference heading. 45 degrees of heading change is about the max you'll want to use. Here, 30 degrees is utilized. When the shackle is done to fix 2's position, the aft aircraft will maneuver the least. In this case, 2 doesn't have to change heading at all. Here, 2 is aft and will maneuver a little so that lead does not have to exceed 45 degrees of heading change. Exceeding 45 degrees of heading change isn't recommended. This requires a lot of G's and isn't energy efficient. A bit like the hook turn, cross turns are another 180 degree reversal option. Lead initiates the cross turn by transmitting wire, cross turn. The wingman does not verbally acknowledge this call. Both aircraft execute a contract turn into each other. The wingman is responsible for ensuring flight path deconfliction in the vertical. Aircraft should cross after 60 to 90 degrees of turn and continue through 180 degrees. At 180 degrees, lateral separation may be wide even though the original spacing was correct. To correct this, it is a common technique to perform an auto shackle after the cross turn. Here is a video demonstration of the cross turn and shackle. The cross turn is not a maneuver commonly practiced in T-6 TAC form training for a couple reasons. One, this maneuver results in both aircraft losing visual of one another 60 to 90 degrees into the turn. If visual is not acquired by either aircraft after a 180-degree rollout, that aircraft must call blind. If both aircraft are blind, now lead has to direct blind procedures. 2, the spacing ends up being more than 3,000 feet after the 180-degree rollout, making the shackle necessary. For these two reasons, in the T-6, the hook turn is the preferred method when a 180-degree turn reversal is required. Like the cross turn, the in-place turn is not normally a part of the T-6 TAC form set, but the advantage of an in-place turn is it is an immediate turn in the desired direction of travel for both aircraft. Commonly, two in-place turns in the same direction are done in order to do a modified hook turn. To initiate, lead transmits wire in-place 90 right or in-place 90 left. The wingman does not verbally acknowledge this call. Both aircraft turn at the same time, in the same direction, using contract turns. If executed from line abreast, a 90-degree turn will put the formation in trail at whatever lateral spacing existed prior to the turn. Here is a video of two in-place turns, one in each direction. Wedge formation can be used when terrain, tactics, etc. require an increased degree of flight maneuverability. The wedge position is primarily used in the low-level environment. The wedge position is at leads 3 to 4.5 aspect, with a lateral spacing of 2,000 to 3,000 feet. The wingman should stack up 500 feet high, 2 to 300 feet high being the optimal stack, but will not fly lower than lead in the low-level environment. Lead normally directs the wedge position with a radio call, wire 2, go wedge. The wingman maneuvers using power and or geometry to attain proper position, and once in, says, wire 2 in. After lead directs wedge formation, turns do not need to be called by lead. Like with fighting wing, the wingman will maneuver as required to maintain position on either side of lead. Here are two examples of how 2 could go from line abreast to wedge with minimal power changes. When lead needs to bring 2 in from tactical to fingertip, like in basic form, lead will direct either a straight ahead or turning rejoin. Since tactical maneuvers are normally done at 200 knots in the T-6, tactical rejoins are also normally flown by lead at 200 knots. Rejoins will be initiated with a wing rock or radio call. The wingman must acknowledge all radio calls to rejoin. During a straight ahead rejoin, the wingman will rejoin to the side occupied when the rejoin was directed. Unlike a normal straight-ahead rejoin from a trail position, the tactical straight-ahead rejoin begins from line abreast. Assuming line abreast, 2 will make a bid towards lead 6 o'clock position to generate forward line of sight while simultaneously working toward a slightly low stack. If forward line of sight is not established by this initial heading change, it may be necessary to make another bid to lead 6 o'clock. As a technique, visualize an aim point towards the close trail position. Maintain sufficient power to achieve approximately 10 to 20 knots of overtake, and begin to eliminate heading crossing angle to freeze lead's forward line of sight. Once established 100 to 200 feet on an extended fingertip line, slow closure rate and continue to move into fingertip. Accomplish the rejoin without crossing lead's 6 o'clock position. If excessive closure exists, do not rejoin closer to route and make sure to parallel lead's flight path to avoid a conflict. If closure still exists when approaching the 3-9 line, turn away from lead to establish a diverging heading. Once closure is under control, complete the rejoin. Lead can direct 2 to rejoin in a turn from line abreast or from a lower aspect than 9. Typically in T-6 TAC form, 2 will be in or near the fighting wing position before lead directs a turning rejoin. Lead will maintain 45 degrees of bank and 200 knots after directing 2 to rejoin. If lead turns into 2, excessive aspect angle for 2 immediately exists. 2 then requires leg pursuit and vertical turning room to decrease this aspect, making the high or low yo-yo necessary if spacing is an issue. To execute the yo-yo, increase power to max and roll to point at or behind lead 6 o'clock. Once 2 observes forward line of sight, 2 will reverse the turn direction, maneuver to lead's 4 to 5 aspect, and once there, align their fuselage to match lead's turn circle. 2 should use no more than 10 to 15 knots of overtake on the inside of lead's turn. Cross-check airspeed and adjust power to arrive on the rejoin line with desired stack and closure rate. Once established on the rejoin line, follow normal, basic formation turning rejoin procedures. This video shows lead directing a 45-degree check turn and then directing the turning rejoin. Transitioning from tactical position to fighting wing for extended trail is done in a similar manner to the turning rejoin. Radio procedures from the 11248 are used since the advanced T-6 squadron standards do not have ET comms for tactical formation. Lead initiates entry into ET from tactical with a radio call. Wire, next set ET level 3. The wingman responds with 2. Once both aircraft have achieved the correct starting parameters and completed a cleft check, lead will say, Wire 1 ready? The wingman will respond with, Wire 2 ready. Lead then directs a check turn, wire, check 45 right, and turns away from the wingman using a contract turn. The wingman does not roll out after the check turn, but maneuvers as necessary to establish pure pursuit. As the wingman achieves pure pursuit, lead reverses turn direction and sets the wingman on a 4 aspect. The wingman maneuvers as required until reaching fighting wing parameters and then calls Wire 2 in. Both aircraft then set the briefed power setting and commence ET maneuvering. During TAC-form flights, the overhead pattern from tactical initial is an option if landing off station. TAC initial is flown similar to the single ship overhead, except by initial, 2 should be 3,000 feet line abreast and on the side opposite the direction of the brake. While not specified in the 11248, the aircraft generally split the runway from initial to the brake. In the brake zone, lead will either signal with a wing flash or radio call when initiating the brake. Lead brakes to a normal downwind once 2 starts their brake. 2 will roll out after 90 degrees of turn, then turn on to downwind when runway spacing is adequate. 2 may need to adjust power and use leg pursuit or fly slightly wider than lead's ground track for spacing between the 2 aircraft. This completes the lesson on T-6 tactical formation.